John Ceda once believed his life was designed like a luxury blueprint, heir to the Morgan Resorts empire, a future built on power, and a marriage arranged with a woman he had never met. Everything had its place, except for him. One June morning, John stepped out of his expensive Bentley, tossed his tailored blazer into the back seat, and drove west with no destination in mind. He didn't know where he was headed. He just knew he couldn't keep living a life someone else had written for him. 2 days later, he arrived in Bay Shore, a quiet coastal town tucked between pine woods and the Pacific Ocean, where his old nanny, Rosa, used to live. It was the kind of place where time moved slower, where no one knew the Ceda name and no one cared who he was. John wasn't looking for anything in particular. He just wanted a place to breathe, to be himself, if only for a little while. What he didn't know was that fate was already waiting for him. By the shore, with a pair of sandals about to fall off and a barking dog closing in from behind. On his first morning in Bay Shore, John Ceda decided to take a walk through the small town. He left his luxury car parked beneath a tall pine and stepped onto the uneven dirt road leading toward the shoreline. No one recognized him, no one bowed or called him Mr. Ceda. It was liberating. The salty breeze ruffled his messy hair. John smiled for the first time in months. The peace lasted exactly 3 minutes. A bark, loud, fierce. John turned around. A gray-brown hunting dog, nearly the size of a small child, was charging straight at him like a missile. Its eyes were wild, ears pinned back, foam forming at the mouth. John screamed and turned to run. This wasn't the kind of thing that happened in New York, where even dogs wore designer sweaters. He stumbled across the dirt road, slipped on loose stones, and lost one of his fancy loafers. One shoe flew into a ditch, the other clung desperately to his foot, making him wobble like he was dancing. In his panic, he collided with someone. She didn't fall. He did. He landed flat on his back, somehow clutching the sleeve of the woman he'd crashed into. "Are you crazy?" she shouted, yanking her arm free, her southern accent sharp and undeniable. John scrambled to his feet, still wide-eyed. The dog! It was going to eat me. She glanced at the dog. It had stopped a few feet away, panting happily, tail wagging like it had just completed its morning cardio with pride. "Honey," she called sweetly. The dog ran to her side, nuzzling her hand like a puppy. "It's really named Honey?" John blinked. "Yup, she only chases off strangers who step into my fish stall's territory. Strangers like you." She crossed her arms and looked him over. His pants were covered in mud, his shirt wrinkled, hair wild. "You sure you're not lost from some reality show?" John straightened up, brushing off the dirt. "I'm looking for Nanny Rosa." Her expression softened just slightly. "She's my godmother. I'm Helen Kalar." There was a pause, not awkward, just quiet. The kind of silence that hung in the air when something strange had just happened. The kind of moment when the world seems to tilt ever so slightly, so two people can collide. John hadn't planned to stay in Bay Shore for more than a day, but somehow that day stretched into 2, then 3. Eventually, he stopped counting. Nanny Rosa, though clearly surprised when John showed up at her front door with a muddy shirt and one missing loafer, smiled and welcomed him in like he'd never left. She set him up with a small upstairs room in her old wooden house, facing the sea. Each morning, the smell of toast, the salty ocean breeze, and the rhythmic crashing of waves woke him. But the real reason John got out of bed each day wasn't the sound of waves. It was Helen. They ran into each other more often than he expected. At first it was random, at the fish market, the corner store, the docks. But then, without explanation, Helen started showing up at his door at 6 a.m., shoving a box of dried fish into his hands and saying, "Help me with deliveries. Try not to mess it up." John, who once couldn't tell tuna from mackerel, began to learn the names of every fish, every family, every winding dirt path that snaked through the beachside huts. He was clumsy, constantly dropping crates, chased by dogs, or stepping on sharp seashells. But Helen never complained. She just laughed and shook her head as if his clumsiness was endearing. One afternoon, while they sat on the wooden steps behind the market, John asked, "Why this job?" Helen stared out at the sea. "I didn't choose it. My mom died young, and my little brother needed someone. I took over. At first it was survival. Then, turns out I'm good at it." He nodded. "I used to be good at something too, signing contracts, wearing suits, following a life someone else designed for me. And now? Now I'm really good at dropping fish crates." Helen laughed, the sound ringing out under the summer sun. In that golden light, with the scent of salt, dried fish, and kids playing nearby, John felt something shift inside him. He no longer thought about stocks or boardrooms. Mornings stopped feeling like obligations. He smiled more, talked less. And every time Helen handed him a new box of fish, his heart fluttered, like she was handing him something far more important than work, a chance to feel real. John had grown used to the early mornings, the delivery routes with Helen, the way she always tied her hair back and bent down to double knot her shoelaces before stepping outside. Every little thing made him feel like he belonged. But that peaceful happiness didn't last long. One evening, while they were unloading fish in the back storage shed, John's phone rang. He looked at the screen and froze. "Grandpa Henry, emergency call." The voice on the other end was cold and brief. "He's been hospitalized. It's serious. You need to come back to New York. Now." There wasn't much time. No real choice. John left the next morning at dawn. No goodbye to Helen. He had walked to her door, stood there for a while. But the lights were off. The waves offered no answers. So he scribbled a note. "I'll come back." Then placed it on the windowsill, beneath the seashell she had given him the day they met. Helen found the note that afternoon. She read it, folded it neatly, said nothing. Just stared out at the ocean, eyes unblinking. Helen didn't ask why he left. She didn't ask why he hadn't said goodbye. She simply stayed silent. That day, she still made her deliveries as usual. She still tied her hair back, still bent down to double knot her shoelaces like every morning. But her steps felt heavier, her eyes quieter, and her smile completely gone. People in town joked, "Looks like that city boy went back to his world." Helen didn't reply. She just lowered her head, packed the fish into crates, and walked away faster than usual. That evening, she sat alone on her front porch, holding the familiar seashell, now dulled slightly from salt and air. Beside it lay the short note, "I'll come back." She read it over, and each time the words blurred a little more, not from rain, but from fading hope. Helen wasn't angry at John. She was angry at herself for letting her heart believe in something that was never meant to be hers. A man from another world who had walked into her life like a breeze and disappeared just as easily. She told herself, maybe I was just a stop along the way, a brief distraction between boardroom meetings. And so she folded the note, placed the seashell back in its wooden box, locked it, and kept going, as if no one named John Sita had ever passed through her life. 2 years passed in the blink of an eye. John Sita, now acting CEO of Morgan Resorts, sat in a towering Manhattan boardroom. Golden light bathed his crisp suit, but his eyes drifted elsewhere. Contracts had been signed, flights taken, deals made. But one thing hadn't changed. He still couldn't forget Helen. And then, as if the universe had decided to toy with him, her name appeared, not in memory, but on the thick folder lying before him. Helen Kalar, Chief Executive Officer, Kalar Enterprises. The name brought silence to the entire room. The strategic partner, the one his family had selected for a business merger. Her. It was her. "There's one condition," the lawyer said. The agreement becomes binding only if you and Ms. Kalar enter a marriage contract. A family alliance is critical to the company's restructure. John didn't hesitate. I agree. Helen walked into the boardroom 2 days later, not in a t-shirt and jeans like in his memories, but in a white tailored suit, her hair neatly tied back, eyes cold as glass. She looked at him like he was just another man in the crowd. "Hello, Mr. Sita," she said, her voice light as wind and sharp as ice. He rose to his feet, silent, unsure if he should smile, cry, or apologize first. The meeting unfolded like a performance. Polished language, perfect posture, not a single glance too long, not a single word about the past. On the day they signed the marriage contract, Helen arrived on time. So did John. "This is just a formality," she said without looking at him. "After this, I don't need you involved in my life." John nodded. "I understand." But he didn't understand. He didn't understand why his heart raced during the ceremony, why his hand trembled as he slid the ring onto her finger. Helen looked down at the silver band. No smile, no tears, only a silence that pressed like weight. She had learned to hide everything behind that calm, sharp gaze. John realized she was no longer the girl from Bayshore. She was a different woman now, strong, proud, guarded. And he was still the man who never said goodbye. The Sita estate sat atop a seaside hill, secluded from the city, surrounded by pine trees and the steady rhythm of waves. The space was big enough for two people to live together, without ever crossing paths. And that's exactly how Helen and John lived during the first few weeks after their wedding. In the mornings, Helen woke early, ate breakfast alone, and headed to work. John woke later, usually sipping cold coffee while cleaning up the dishes she'd left behind. At night, they returned to the same house, but stayed in opposite wings. No greetings, no glances, nothing like newlyweds. John tried. He really did. He started waking up earlier. One morning, he made coffee and toast. He set it on the table with a note. "Have a good day, Helen." She didn't reply, but the coffee cup was empty. The next day, he tried again. This time, he added a heart-shaped fried egg. Still no words, but there was a small note waiting. "Eggs burnt." He laughed. At least it was something. On a Saturday morning, John knocked on Helen's door. No answer, but minutes later, she appeared in running gear, ready to jog. "You planning to join me?" she asked. "Unless you're running a marathon." She said nothing, just turned and started jogging. He followed behind. They didn't talk the whole route, but John knew he was entering her routine. Slowly, one step at a time. He was no longer entirely on the outside. Another day, Helen asked him to go to the grocery store. Just a short sentence. "I need someone to carry the bags." John accepted the task like a school kid assigned group work by a favorite teacher. At the store, she picked dried fish, soy sauce, vegetables. He helped her bag the groceries, grabbed extra paper bags, handled the checkout. Every now and then, she looked at him like she was about to say something, but didn't. That night, they cleaned up dinner together. John said, "It's been a while since I've seen you out of a suit." Helen replied, "It's been a while since I went shopping with my husband." He paused. She gave a faint smile, a small, quick smile, but enough to stay with him all night. Still, there was a space between them, a wound not yet healed. On some nights, John stood outside her door with a cup of warm milk, then walked away. Some mornings, Helen spotted his forgotten jacket on the sofa, thought about folding it, then left it where it was. They both respected the boundary. Helen couldn't deny it. John had changed. He was no longer the proud man in a tailored suit, walking through a fishing village with leather shoes that didn't belong. Now he was the quiet one brewing coffee each morning, cleaning up his own kitchen disasters, and enduring her cold stares day after day without complaint. And that, oddly enough, made her uneasy. Because deep down, she felt her heart responding. The little things he did, his neatly written notes, the way he never tracked water into the house, the way he always saved her favorite part of the meal, each act quietly stirred something buried inside her. She remembered how he once wiped fish scales off her hand with his own handkerchief, even though they were practically strangers. She remembered the scent of sea salt on his shirt during a rushed delivery. Those memories hadn't faded. But the past was also why she held the distance, because he had left without explanation, without goodbye. And it had taken her a long time to learn how to stand again after that wound. So now, even if her heart wanted to believe, her mind kept her back. She let him into her life again, but only halfway, close enough to see, not close enough to touch. Sometimes she wondered, what if he leaves again? And because no one could give her an answer, Helen chose to say, nothing. No one mentioned Bayshore. No one mentioned the sudden goodbye. And no one dared ask how much it had hurt. But in every awkward gesture, every stolen glance, every long silence, something had begun to shift. Something that felt a lot like hope. One Thursday evening, while John hadn't yet returned, Helen was tidying up the living room when she noticed his iPad left on the sofa. The screen was still lit. A video had been recently played. It wasn't curiosity, just instinct. She tapped on the video. On screen, a boy around 3 years old laughed and ran through a grassy yard. John's voice echoed from behind the camera. "Careful, Andy. Slow down, son." Those last two words struck her like a cold blade to the chest. She froze. Her heart pounded so hard she couldn't hear anything else. Her vision blurred, the world twisting into a dizzying spiral. Son? He had a child? With who? Since when? Had he started a family during those 2 missing years? She quietly closed the iPad. No tears fell, but her heart shattered in complete silence. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay staring at the ceiling, questions spinning in her head, none with answers. At dawn, she packed a small bag and left a single line on paper. "I don't know what you haven't told me, but I'm not the third party in anyone's story." Then Helen left the estate and returned to Bayshore. John came home that evening to an empty house. No lights, no Helen's shoes, no teacup on the table, but a letter in the center of the living room. He read it. His face went pale. A second later, he understood what had happened. He rushed to the sofa, grabbed the iPad. The video was still there. Andy, his nephew, his sister's child. A silly old family clip his mother had sent him to help get used to kids. "Oh, God," John whispered, hands trembling. The next day, he jumped in his car and drove straight to Bayshore. Helen was standing in front of her old fish stall as if she'd never left. Her hair tied back in a worn shirt, her eyes more tired than ever. John approached. "Helen?" She turned away, voice like ice. "I don't want to hear your excuses. It's not my son," he said quickly. "The boy in the video, Andy, is my nephew, my sister's child." Helen stopped. He stepped closer. "I'm sorry. I didn't know the video was open. I didn't think you'd misunderstand. But I don't have a child. There's no one else. Only you." Silence. Helen turned around, eyes glistening. "Then why did you say son?" He gave a small, pained smile. "Because my sister made me practice being a dad. She sent that video to help me imagine." She stayed silent for a long time. The breeze carried the scent of dried fish, sea salt, and memories she thought were gone. "You don't get to just show up and expect me to believe everything you say," Helen snapped. "You disappeared, no goodbye, and now you show up, say a few words, and think that makes it okay?" "I didn't know what to say back then," John shot back. "Everything happened so fast, I didn't mean to leave you like that." "Didn't mean to?" She laughed bitterly. "You left me the moment I started to believe in you, the moment I thought, Maybe this time was real. John stepped back, as if struck. "I thought about you every single day," he said, his voice cracking. "I missed you like hell, Helen. You think it was easy for me after I left?" "Then why didn't you come back?" she asked, her eyes glassy. "Why did you leave me with all those questions and no answers?" He clenched his fists. "Because I was scared." "Scared of what?" "Scared you wouldn't forgive me. Scared you'd moved on. Scared you built a life that didn't include me anymore." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the sound of distant waves and the salt in the air, stirring memories neither had fully buried. Helen exhaled. "I tried to forget you, really. I tried to live like you'd never walked into my life." "And?" She shook her head. "I failed?" John stepped closer, gently placing his hand on her shoulder. "Then let me get it right this time. Let me try, not for the contract, not for the company. For us." Helen didn't answer, but she didn't walk away. And for John, that was the first time. She stayed. That night, Helen didn't return to the estate. She stayed in Bayshore, in the small room beside her mother's old store. John didn't push, didn't ask questions. He only sent a message: "I'll wait, as long as it takes." 3 days later, while John was helping Nanny Rosa pack dried fish in the back kitchen, the door creaked open. Helen stood there, in an oversized white shirt and old sandals. Her eyes were tired, but her gaze was no longer cold. "Can I sit?" she asked. John nodded. He pulled out a chair for her, carefully, as if afraid one wrong move might shatter everything. "I've been thinking," Helen began, "about what happened, about your fear, and about my hurt." John said nothing. He just listened. "I don't need promises. I don't need grand gestures," she continued. "I just want to know, if I give you my heart again, will you hold it with both hands?" John looked at her. "Not just both hands, with everything I have." She chuckled, a soft, genuine sound. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a silver cufflink, just a plain, simple band that had once belonged to his mother. "I didn't kneel the first time. I didn't propose properly. I'd like to fix that, but only if you'll let me." Helen looked at the ring, then at him. "I will, on one condition." "What's that?" "From now on, if you're going to disappear, even for a few minutes, you tell me first. I can't handle another disappearance." John smiled, sliding the ring onto her finger. "Deal. I'll never vanish without a trace again, unless I'm off burning your eggs." They both laughed. And this time, when their hands met, there was no distance, no silence, only one thing, a true beginning. 1 week later, they held a wedding. No fancy gowns, no grand orchestra, no hundreds of guests. Just the shores of Bayshore, the place they first met, where hearts were broken, and where they were finally healed. That afternoon, the sky was clear, the breeze gentle. Simple white ribbons were tied around the small wooden chairs placed in the sand. Nanny Rosa stood in the center, smiling brightly, holding a weathered old book of vows. Helen wore a plain white dress, holding a bouquet of wild daisies she'd picked from Rosa's backyard. Her hair was loose, soft like the look in her eyes when she saw John. John wore a white shirt, light gray slacks, no tie. He didn't look like a CEO, didn't look like a traditional groom. He just looked like a man standing in front of the woman he loved and didn't want to lose again. When they held hands, the wind picked up slightly, as if teasing, carrying the sound of waves and the sweet, salty scent of summer air. "Today," Helen said, voice trembling, "I'm not promising forever. I'm just promising that every morning I'll choose to love you again." John looked at her, eyes glistening. "Same here. I don't know what the future holds, but if every day is a choice, I'll choose you. Every time." Nanny Rosa nodded, moved. "Well then, I think that's all we need." They kissed. No cheering, no confetti, no loud declarations. Just a quiet touch between two people who had finally found their way home. They didn't promise a perfect future, but under that fading sun on the beach, something unspoken passed between them. A quiet vow, sealed not with words, but with presence. And just when they thought peace had finally settled in, a tiny miracle came knocking. The news came on a quiet morning. John was making coffee. Helen sat by the window, gently rubbing her belly, a new habit she developed without realizing. She looked at him, her eyes unsure but glowing. "John," she said softly, "I think we're going to be 3 soon." John looked up, nearly dropping the mug in his hand. He was speechless for a few seconds, then walked over, knelt in front of her, and placed his hand on her stomach. "Really? Really?" He laughed, his eyes already glistening. "I haven't even figured out how to fry your eggs properly." 9 months later, they welcomed a baby girl. Black hair, fair skin, and deep eyes like her mother's. Helen named her Marin, which meant from the sea. Though they continued running Morgan Resorts together, John and Helen chose a more balanced life. On weekdays, they worked in the city, signing contracts, managing hotels, growing the company. But every weekend, no matter how busy things got, they returned to Bayshore. The old house by the sea had been renovated, not overly luxurious, but full of light, laughter, and the scent of dried fish Helen still kept as a memory. Marin grew up to the sound of waves, the wind, and early mornings with her parents making coffee, toast, and arguing over who changed the last diaper. They didn't live like a perfect couple. They lived real, messy, flawed, but always filled with love. That afternoon, Marin was playing with seashells while Helen and John walked hand in hand along the beach, where it all began. The waves still lapped gently at the shore, the sky was brilliantly blue, and the sunset painted gold across the sand. John bent down, picked up a tiny shell, and placed it in her palm. "The first time we met, you threw a shell at me." Helen laughed. "Because you made me fall." "Not my fault, it was Rosa's dog." "Actually," she turned to him, smiling, "I should thank that dog." John looked out at the sea. "Funny, isn't it? I spent years following a path designed by others, and all it took was one wild dog to chase me into the life I was meant to find." John chuckled, squeezing her hand a little tighter. Life doesn't always need perfect plans, binding contracts, or glittering titles. Sometimes all it takes is one random chase set up by fate, and it ends with a hand you'll never let go of for the rest of your life.